All right. So, hello. This is In Conversation with an End of Life Specialist. And first, I want to acknowledge that November is National Hospice Month and express my appreciation for hospice staff and volunteers. I'm Patricia Sears, and this is being recorded and will be uploaded to Spotify and Apple Podcasts within the next 48 hours. This is the podcast where we talk about navigating life's important changes with grace, dignity, and support. And whether you're planning for your own future, supporting aging parents, or helping a loved one through a major life transition, you're in the right place. We're here to have honest conversations about the topics that matter most when life changes. And today, I'm talking with Lori Rizzo, a Doula Givers Institute certified end-of-life doula and a certified dementia practitioner through the National Council of Certified Dementia Practitioners. Through her organization, Compassionate Crossings, Lori serves the Philadelphia metro area, including Lehigh Valley. And today we're talking about dementia care in end-of-life care. And now we have a message from our sponsor, Graceful Transitions. I'm Patricia Sears, your host, and Graceful Transitions is where I provide my end-of-life doula services. And here's what I believe. The conversations you're hearing on this podcast about aging, end-of-life planning, and family caregiving, they shouldn't be purely podcast topics. They should be conversations you're actually having with the people that you love. And through Graceful Transitions, I help families have those conversations. I facilitate workshops on proactive planning for end-of-life care, provide one-on-one support for end-of-life decisions, and help you create a plan that reflects your values before crisis hits. If you're thinking I should probably do something about this, email me at trish@kingdomcommons.com. And Graceful Transitions, because these conversations matter most to you. All right, let's get into it. Lori, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about what we like to talk about, right? As end of life doulas.
Exactly. So I'm going to hand it over to you for any further, introduction of yourself, and then get started as we had discussed, which was you wanted to give us a baseline on dementia, stigma, and all that, and transition naturally from there. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I've been doing this work for about 3.5 years. I do have a private practice. I'm also a volunteer and deaf literacy educator in my community. And very early in my training and in my work, I found myself supporting people living with dementia, both as a volunteer and my very first doula client. So I saw firsthand how dementia reshapes not just one person's life, but their entire circle of care around them. And it affects now nearly 7 million older adults in the US. And with that, there's almost 12 million Americans who are providing unpaid care for someone with dementia, often quietly, often exhausted, and frequently like unsure where to turn. So I got into this work as a doula, and I sort of started taking this path to learn more about dementia because there's a need for help and support for the circle of care and the individual themselves. So I did want to talk about, kind of what I really would love people to know. And really first and foremost, that's talking about like reducing stigma and like really talking openly about this. Um, it's it's something that a lot of things, including death and grief, that we really don't want to talk about. And a lot of times, what stigma tells people is, well, we can hide it until we can't, right? And that silence sort of means that families may miss the window to plan, to get more support. So really, one of the most powerful things we can do is talk about dementia and like the way we talk about heart disease or diabetes, getting early testing, seeking out answers, and openly and compassionately, and really without shame. I'm part of an organization called Dementia Friendly PA locally in my county, and one of the things that we do is provide education in the community. And one of the part of the information session is asking people like what word comes to mind when you hear the word dementia, and it's very often um, memory loss, no hope, things that are very like negative, right? Um, that just points to the fact that the stigma and the thought around it is that nobody wants to have it, nobody wants to know about it, nobody wants to talk about it. So I love the idea of being able to kind of talk to you today about, having hope. It doesn't come from pretending it doesn't, that disease doesn't exist, or being in denial about it, or that it isn't serious. It is a serious disease. And often it is the cause of death for someone who has dementia later on. But I've seen people, who can't recall their own daughter's name, but still light up when they hear their wedding song, or smell a familiar scent, or see a familiar location, right? And that's dignity, and that's meaning, and that's destigmatizing that it's not all hope is lost. It again is a serious disease, absolutely. But
So,
I
Lori, I
love to
was
like reframe the narrative to be able to kind of talk more about this. Yes.
you said that people can die from dementia. I That's the first I've heard of it. I thought people died from their underlying disease and, and with dementia. So, can you tell us more about how dementia can cause death?
Yes, and you're right. It can be that there's like a comorbidity or something else happening at end of life. But people absolutely die from Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. Because if you think about it as a disease of the brain, and how our brain and the different lobes of our brain affect so much of what we do. Um, Eventually, if someone lives long enough and they don't have another disease process that they die from, they will die from complications of what happens to their body in advanced dementia. So it could be that eventually swallowing becomes a problem. This is just one example. And the swallowing becomes a problem, and they are continually getting pneumonia from aspirating on food or liquid. And sometimes they might be back and forth to the hospital with this pneumonia, and eventually, not being able to eat at all. Right. So
Mhm.
that's one example. That we could spend an entire hour talking about kind of what happens with the disease process of dementia, and depending on the different dementias as well. But
Mhm.
it is considered a life limiting or terminal illness, however you want to put it. But just like
Thank you
other
for that.
illnesses, that you think somebody might have cancer, then they might have a heart attack. Things like that, of
Mhm.
course, do happen.
Right. Well,
Mhm.
thank you for that. And for clarifying, I think that helps the baseline as well of our understanding that, it is, recognized as a disease, and that death can be resulting because, as you mentioned, it isn't just forgetting. It's, there is a disease working on different parts of the brain that control our gut, our swallowing, our mobility, voice and everything like that. So that's important. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure. Vision, balance, all kinds
Mhm.
of executive functions which is
Mm.
really a big part of what happens is a loss of executive function, including memory, but among other things. And I think that's important because, and I know Trish, you and I talked about, the value and the importance of conversations around this, and even before diagnosis, like we're all here today, and I don't know what everyone's story is, but conversations about what's normal aging, what's versus what's more concerning, conversations around like who's checking in on our loved ones, how isolation and loneliness can affect our cognitive function. And Medicare offers cognitive screening every year as part of the wellness check, but many people never get that, or the doctor doesn't do it, or they don't want it. And getting a baseline is really one of the simplest, most powerful tools that we have to kind of track, what's happening with our cognitive function. But again, the stigma and fear around it keep people silent. I sometimes do events where I go to senior health fairs or health fairs and have a table with my dementia friendly team. And many people see what we are about and they're like, oh, well, I'm not there yet. Meanwhile, they're there because they're aging, right? And they want resources, but they don't necessarily want to hear or talk about dementia because they're not there yet. And really, it's fear, because I mean, and it makes sense. I understand the fear, but the silence and not talking about it and not getting testing really delay diagnosis, and also a window of opportunity where there might be a chance to possibly take something. There's new drugs coming out all the time. I don't know a lot about that personally, but where it could, maybe slow the progression. And then also having these conversations while you still can about what's important to you.
And I
So,
think I've heard you, I'm sorry to interrupt. I
mhm,
think I've heard you mention that, in just our general end of life doula care
mhm,
work, but certainly, with dementia is, when you're tabling, and people are like, "Roar, it's not about me, I'm good." And it's like, well, you may know somebody, and that's an invitation that opens the door. It's kind
yeah,
of like, oh, yeah, it could be the neighbor, it could be my relative,
mhm,
and maybe, and I've heard you talk about this, is like, so if, I can tell you a little bit more, or you can take these resources, this may help, you know, a loved one or a friend of a friend, that kind of thing. And that's a nice soft way
yeah.
sometimes to get it.
Yeah, and you know what? And thank you for that. We that is the approach I take now, as I've gotten a little bit more assertive in trying to get people to stop and talk at our table. And more times than not, I would say 80% do know someone. We all
Mhm.
do, right? Like
Mhm.
we all know someone, or we know a close someone who has someone, right?
Mhm.
That has a dementia diagnosis or is living with dementia. So yeah, thank you for that. And part of that conversation again is understanding some of the differences between signs of dementia and just normal aging, which is
Mhm.
which is important. And part of those conversations is talking about the screening, and I think it's like one in three older adults, which is only a third, reports receiving cognitive assessments at their regular medical care.
So when you say the cognitive assessment,
Hmm.
is that what we get once a year? I'll speak for me. Medicare is paying for it. Is, when we have to draw the clock and when we have to remember the three things, the
Hmm.
person giving it says, "Yeah, I'm going to tell you three things and
Hmm.
we'll, talk about it later."
Yeah.
That's kind of rudimentary, is that what you're talking about, or is it more in depth, a cognitive assessment?
I yeah, I think that's more of a memory screening. Um,
Okay,
Cognitive assessment would be a lot more involved. Yeah.
okay, good to know.
But I don't know what my statistic, now that you're asking, if that one in three is more of a memory screening or a more in-depth cognitive assessment.
But I
But
think it's worthy of conversation in All About Me land. It's
yes.
worthy of a conversation with my primary care person,
Yeah.
medical person, to say, so I did the clock, I remember the three words, but
Mhm.
is there another cognitive assessment that you have available that I could, take?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I think that with dementia, even though doctors care, there's there needs to be more robust testing and assessment
Mm,
for everyone, because it exists. So I'm a strong advocate for being an advocate for yourself, and asking what else there is and sort of doing that research.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Because again, that gives you a reference point. And just like other testing, we have a baseline, right? And
mhm,
if something starts feeling different next year, you have something to compare it to. It's not a diagnosis of dementia, but it starts the conversation, right? And opens the door to maybe more in-depth cognitive assessment or early interventions or and planning. What do we
mm,
do now? What kind of planning should we be thinking of when there is a dementia diagnosis?
mhm.
So yeah, yeah, good question. Um, so those are some of the things I really wanted to emphasize, this reducing of the stigma and knowing that, people can live and long lives and in early years they can still be very much involved in their life, and experience joy, and some people find other meaning in other work. I do have a resource. I love this organization. I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's Dementia Minds, and they are a group of people who are support for each other, for people living with dementia or mild cognitive impairment, where they get together and can kind of like talk to each other. It's one of the few places that I know of where we hear from the lived experience of people with dementia. There's not a lot of research about what it's like for them, right? So I love that organization and that resource for people to have some other folks and their circle of care, right? Their care partners to also have, for talking and just understanding each other. Like
Mm.
other scenarios where you're uniquely qualified because you're you're living that same experience. So
Right.
yeah.
So now, if we can segue into what's different or, about dementia care in end of life care.
Well, I think it depends on where they are in their journey. Um,
Hmm.
but it's such a slow, sort of uncertain trajectory where people can live up, 4 to 10 years and sometimes up to 20 years after diagnosis. There's not many other diseases that we that we know, that far in advance. Um, so that's a big part of it. The decline is more most of the time, not all the time, more gradual. And yet, as their significant cognitive changes come about, their body may keep going, right? So it means that, end of life care with dementia is sort of less about, one clear moment, and more about slowly shifting the focus toward comfort and safety and dignity over time. But that's probably the biggest difference for the individual. And then with the family, there's so much emotional complexity. There's a lot of anticipatory grief, which if you haven't heard that term, is kind of what it sounds like. Anticipating that this person's life is ending, even if it could be years, because you're seeing this change in them, whether it's gradual or it feels a little bit faster in some cases. Your loved one is kind of changing as you know them now. I believe they're still who they are inside, and there's always moments of that familiarity of who they are. But there's sometimes role reversals and a lot of um, caregiving that is difficult to manage and actually many times needs training, right? How do we engage with individuals that are living with dementia when it's um, when it involves cognitive changes that we're not used to, right?
Mhm.
We're used to having a conversation with them where they can engage the way you are. And then there's the constant decision fatigue where, what do we do next? Or how do we handle this situation? And, we can talk all day, right, about the healthcare systems and where it's broken in many places, but they really are still so behind and not built around the unique needs of people living with dementia, especially in the
Mm.
later stages. Um, that's really, really hard for families to get the help that they need. So those are some things that come to mind.
So
And
can you give me a little sorry, a little bit more context about, the system not being more friendly, if you will,
Mhm.
to, people with dementia and their circle of care? Is there anything that you can think of as a story that, you've been involved in or just know about?
Yeah, um, if you're looking at somebody who's, let's say, has Alzheimer's, they're still able to be up and around and engage in activities. There's not a lot of places for them to live. So there's memory care, which is quite expensive, depending on the individual and then their family and what they can afford. Um, if they need skilled care, then there might be a nursing home or skilled care facility that can handle them or can care for them, excuse me, um, for physical needs. But then there are not a lot of training in those facilities to engage, right, and to be able to care for them holistically or emotionally until with everything else, right? How do we care for this person that can't speak for themselves and is in a nursing home and may have behavioral changes because they're scared or because the way they're being cared for isn't the way someone with Alzheimer needs to be cared for. Um,
Mm.
for example, um, there's a struggle a lot of times with hygiene and maybe getting them to shower. Um, because I mean, and if you think about it, it makes sense. If somebody's not trained how to engage with someone who has cognitive changes and like, why are you touching me, right? Like we're all private in that area, right? And now all of a sudden, I don't even know why you're trying to bathe me. I don't even know who you are, even though you're the same person I see every day. So there are different ways to approach and approach the care for someone with Alzheimer's that they just may not know. They just may not
Mhm.
have the training for. So a lot of it is training. A lot of it is putting people in um, in in places that they're among others who don't have the same needs.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
if that makes sense. Um,
So,
and the problem is
Nadine,
that people, I'm sorry, that it's hard sometimes at a particular point for families to keep them at home, even with
right.
24-hour care, for the same
So,
reason.
so that's a great entree actually to what I was going to ask you. Nadine and I are also hospice volunteers for our local hospice organization. And occasionally, I'll just speak for myself, I've been, you know, um, alerted to I may be needed as a hospice volunteer for someone with a form of dementia. And it's because, their circle of care need respite. So they need to just leave the house for whatever reason for a
Mhm.
couple of hours. And I noticed myself, I checked myself because I was like, what do I do? How do I do this? Now I'm guessing that, we would be prepared and say, this is what this person needs or doesn't need, and, different behaviors. But I have to admit, it does trigger me into, will I know what to do?
Mhm.
Um, and, these, people that, as I mentioned, were hospice volunteers like you. So their comorbidity, if you will, is, or co-diagnosis is, another physical ailment that has, qualified them for hospice care.
Well, people are on hospice and can be eligible for hospice because of dementia. That could
Oh,
be, yeah, that could
okay.
be the reason that they are. And that varies depending on where they are, right? And
Right.
what decline has been. But that's a really good point. I mean, you're basically saying that you kind of feel that way too, and that's how, you know, and a CNA, a certified nurse assistant, I think that's the name, may feel in a skilled nursing care or even in an assisted living, right? So
Mhm,
if your loved one is in an assisted living, um, they can have dementia, but does the
mhm,
staff know how to best care for them, to
mhm,
approach them, to keep things safe for them? Um,
mhm,
and, and that's not always easy to find. Um, I just spoke with a family this week who loved one had frontotemporal dementia, which is different than Alzheimer's and will often, because of the frontal and temporal part of the brain, the frontal part of the frontal lobe will, affect reasoning and emotions, and they can become aggressive. And he was in memory care. And even though it's memory care, that's what the type of facility it is. He's no longer able to be there because he was, unfortunately, um, violent and not his fault at all. It's the disease.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
I don't know all of the details, right, about how
mhm,
he was treated or cared for, but this is a difficult scenario
mhm,
because the family just wants a place for him to be to have the best quality of life, and
mhm,
there's really not a good answer.
mhm, mm.
Yeah.
So, thinking again in All About Me land as an end of life doula, um, tell me more about, um, advanced care planning that's available for dementia, and when when should we seriously consider that kind of planning? What I've heard, and so I know enough to be dangerous, is that if um, dementia is in your family, or your that kind of thing, is it's a good thing to just be aware of it, of the advanced planning for dementia care. But I don't know if you have any other um, advice on that, or that we can be aware of.
I mean, certainly, if we have a genetic, concern, but I want to shout from the rooftops that everybody should talk about this possibility. It may never
Mhm,
happen, right? Um,
mhm,
it we I talked to another family today. The husband is 99, the wife is 97, and he doesn't have any cognitive changes. He's pretty sharp, so it's not inevitable. But the older we get, the higher risk of dementia. But when we talk so much, as doulas about having advanced care directives, and they're great, right? And it's all about the medical stuff. Do I want a DNR? Do I want a feeding tube? All of that. Um, but I think that everybody should know about, read, learn about the advanced care directives that are out there for dementia and have those conversations, because the other advanced directives don't cover what it means when the person no longer recognizes their loved ones, or when they're not able to feed themselves, right? When they're not able to live at home. Um, so to me, I think everybody should talk about it and prepare for it. Now, if you have a diagnosis and it's early, definitely then, right? At that point. But what if the diagnosis comes later, which it often does, and by the time the diagnosis is made, that person's really not able to speak for themselves. So let's get the conversations going and talk about what their preferences are and what's important to them while they're still able to say that for themselves, right?
So that's kind of related to the cognitive assessment.
Mhm.
So, for, us, or if we're part of a circle of care, is to, see, I don't know if hospice can conduct it, but to see if, the primary care um, medical professional can, do that cognitive assessment. I mean, that's a delicate conversation of like, so how about we all take a cognitive assessment? And maybe that's the way to do it is, I don't know if there's an age restriction, that we can say, I'm going to go get a cognitive assessment. You want to do that with me? That kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then, to just have that, reality check, and then, be, more informed and aware, I guess, of when and if an advanced care directive, for dementia is, would be useful and helpful. And before we change, I'm going to open up to questions in a couple of minutes. Is remind me where we can find that advanced directive for dementia.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. Well, there's more than a couple, but one that I just wanted to mention is Conversation Project, and
Mhm.
they have wonderful guides in general for talking about these difficult things regarding end of life and advanced illness, and just when you get a diagnosis. But they do have one for people for caregivers of people with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, and it's really about preparing to talk about it, having the talk, advocating, and really helping the the family or the care partner, whomever, to open that conversation up so that their loved one can express what matters to them, right? What their values are, um, and then how, and assisting that circle of care in representing those wishes when and if it comes to a point. So it really emphasizes starting those conversations early when decision making capacity still remains. And it uses very simple, respectful language where you're really talking about what down the road we can do to honor those wishes. Things like I said, um, it's really about quality of life. If you don't
Mhm.
if you don't recognize loved ones anymore, or you can no longer bathe or care for your own personal hygiene independently, and it chooses between goals like I want to live as long as possible, to treat me but not aggressively, or allow natural death. And
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
conversations can't be had at that point. And it's
Right.
really about too the family being able to say, um, before crisis, before confusion, before end of life, that they're not in the dark and they can say, we're not choosing this for mom. We're following what mom asked us to or told us
Mhm.
to. Yeah. So
So, just for the people who are listening to the podcast, um, I will be putting all of these links in the show notes. And for those of you who are subscribers to my Substack, I put out, a, a wrap up kind of thing with links. So that'll be coming out again in about 48 hours. Okay, let me open it for questions. Um, Nadine, what are you thinking about?
Hello. Um, you were talking, and I'm sorry, Lori, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay,
Mhm.
the letters are so small on my little iPad. You were talking about having those conversations, those difficult but necessary conversations before um, anybody has dementia. But uh, Trish has a wonderful program online, or, well, no, not in person, online, that teaches that whole sequence of you're 20 years old, you still need to have an advanced directive. And to encourage people. We all, Trish, another two people, and I went through the UVM end of life doula program together. And out of that came a wish of one of the people who had just finished taking care of her mother-in-law to, we're in a rural community where we are, where Trish and I live. It's rural. The three towns really, and going up to Troy and Lowell, they all kind of act together, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. Um, One of the women gathered us and we said, we need to be available in our community to teach more and to be there for people more. And that's what we're doing. It's called the Northeast Kingdom Death Care Community. And we've had several wonderful programs, gotten little grants to do them. But teaching just that, what you were saying is, we're not going to get out of this alive, you know, but let's have the best end.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
totally agree with you, and live to the end.
Yeah.
And can I just add one more thing? I am currently a hospice volunteer with a woman who has dementia. Um, Her behavior, everything is perfect, but she lives in the past. And I think if you're going to have dementia, that might be a good kind, because she just talks and talks about her wonderful life. But she's in a care facility and she doesn't have anybody else to talk to because they don't want to hear this all the time. So that's important to, even for care facilities, to make sure she has, or people like that have one-on-one conversations.
Yeah. And that is something lacking in senior living or care facilities.
Yeah,
That
absolutely it is.
the staffing issues, right? Not having it,
Yeah,
and being a hospice volunteer, like that might be the only time every week or
yeah,
how often you see her that she is engaging
yeah,
real conversation,
yeah,
and that's one of the problems.
yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you, Nadine. That was
yeah.
really helpful. Margot, you got anything you were thinking about?
I'm just thinking about my dad. My dad had dementia to a degree, and when my brother moved him down to Maryland, and I would go down to visit, it would take sometimes a good 2 days before I wasn't just the nice lady that was coming to see him. I was actually, he would, he would tell me that his daughter was coming. His daughter was coming, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden I was the daughter, you know.
Mhm.
But and that was heart-wrenching for me, you know. But you know, the as somebody said, you know, the memories and the things that they can bring up are just amazing, amazing. And what I found myself doing was always wearing the same perfume.
Mm,
So he knew, you know, who I was, that was, and actually when he passed, I couldn't wear it. I couldn't
mm,
wear it after that. Took me about 2 years to start wearing it again.
mm,
And you know, but he knew when you know, when he had gotten to the point where he was barely awake, you know, he knew when he smelt that
mhm.
it was me that was
Yeah,
there.
Oh,
Good.
yeah,
wow, wow, wow. That's
yeah. Beautiful
great.
story. And my hope for you is that when you wear it, you think of him.
Oh,
Mhm,
absolutely.
mhm.
Absolutely. No doubt.
Yeah,
No doubt.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that is, thank you, Margot. That is heartbreaking, to have, your loved one, your parent not know who you are. And this is why, like, families and loved ones need so much support. We need to check in on them.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to call and see, how we can help or offer to help. We need to, normalize how difficult it is,
Yeah.
validate how difficult it is to be a caregiver and to see these cognitive changes,
Right. Right.
because it's hard, it hurts, and that's where the grief comes in. Like with dementia, we're it's like you're losing the person slowly, right?
Mhm.
I mean, they call it the long goodbye. I mean, they're still
Mhm.
there. And my hope is that, as a doula and through education, that others can learn, and understand, ways to connect differently. So there's still a connection.
Right.
Oftentimes families kind of turn away. You hear about people, they put them in a home and they don't even go visit. I don't judge
Mhm.
that, because what's that like for that person, and what kind of support do they have to be able to get through that visit, right? To be able to leave there and, you know, not, I mean, we avoid things, right, that are hard sometimes. And this is just profoundly hard and difficult.
And like my mom had, you know, memory loss, but she would
Mhm.
always say, I think I have dementia. And I would say, it's so totally different than what my father had, you know? I mean, I said, you know,
Yeah.
I don't think so, Mom. I think you just selectively forget things.
Oh, don't we all?
Oh, I do that, definitely.
I could leave and my brother would call and she would tell him that she hadn't seen me in weeks, you know, and he would call me and he'd say, what's going on? Why is nobody seeing Mom? I said, I was just there for,
Hmm.
you know, half a
Hmm.
day and I was there, you know, but, um,
Hmm.
Wow.
you know, but sometimes I thought she was just playing, you know, she was just playing, but it was definitely a different feeling with how her memory was than with my dad's,
Yeah.
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, well,
Hmm.
and it's confusing. I mean, we hear about Alzheimer's, and there's a few others people know, vascular dementia now. Frontotemporal is getting more well known, a lot because of Bruce Willis, Lewy body, but there's over 100 forms of dementia, and a lot of times they're mixed. It's hard to diagnose sometimes exactly what it is, and if it's more age related and it starts out later, maybe, it's slower than someone else. It's everyone is different, and that's another reason why it makes it so hard to care
Mhm.
for, than predict, what's going to happen and what works for one in terms of engagement, and, how to care for them might not work for another individual.
Thank you. Kathy, did you have a question? And Kelly, I'll come to you in just a second.
I don't think I really have a question. I'm in the situation where my mother does have dementia,
Mhm.
um, and it's getting worse. She recognizes me, but not a lot of people. But she's in a private care home,
Mhm.
and there's 5 residents and 2 caregivers, and then I have other people coming in to see her with hospice every week. Um, And it's interesting because the other people, the other residents don't have people visiting them. So I have the same conversations with them all the time. And each one thinks I'm just there to visit them. And I just go with it. That's
Oh
all I can
gosh.
do is just go with it. And then I'll just say, okay, well, I'm going to talk to my mom now. Um,
Mhm.
and it's
Wow.
just accepting them where they are.
Mhm.
Mhm,
Yep. Yep.
mhm.
That's exactly right. Just meeting them where they are. If they're in 1940s, that's where
Yeah.
you are with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just nothing else I can do with that. And I'm there every day, except there are times that I'll call my son and say, you have to go take care of her today. Let me have a day off.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
Good.
I make sure somebody goes there every day.
Mm-hmm.
And
Nice.
everybody, and my son knows to sit and talk with everybody.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, I love
Kelly,
that.
Yeah.
Kelly, you had your hand raised.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
There's a whole subgroup of it. I had a mother with dementia, and we were not on speaking terms.
Mm,
And I have found there is a whole subgroup of that generation that is dealing with this, not
Mhm.
being on speaking terms with the family, that
mm,
person, unresolved issues from childhood, whatever, that you have to deal with the fact they're never going to be resolved. You're never going to know if they were
mhm,
sorry or not, nothing. That's a
mhm.
difficult thing. So I just wanted to bring
Yeah.
that up. That's a whole nother subgroup to reach out to.
Yeah,
Right. Thank you.
thank you, Kelly. Thank you for naming that. It's absolutely the case. Yeah. And there's a whole nother level of grief then, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Similar to if someone dies suddenly and you hadn't resolved, you know. But
Mhm.
yeah, thank you for that.
Helen, did you have something?
Yeah, I did. When I think of, families that are going through this with their loved ones having dementia, I think there's such um, an opportunity that these people just, the families are really feeling more abandoned, if you will, by friends and family, right?
Mhm.
Because people aren't as apt to visit. Someone that has cancer and they're dying, you can visibly see that they're sick, and people are more drawn to come in and sit with the bedside or, have a cup of tea or something. Where patients with dementia, I think, or people with dementia, sometimes family and friends are fearful of coming to visit. They don't know what to expect. So I think having that awareness of the greater potential for isolation of these caregivers is huge.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it happens sometimes gradually too, not just at end of life. The diagnosis itself has so much stigma that, and then as people start seeing, even if it's subtle changes, like, oh, that's not my friend anymore. I worked with a family that her mom had dementia, was end stage. She was not ambulatory, in bed for a couple of years. Um, and I can't tell you how often this happens. I don't know, but it can. And she didn't engage anymore. Mostly, all she still did was eat when she was spoon fed. But this woman was like a big part of her community. She had a lot of friends. She helped a lot of people, and it was so hurtful for her daughter, who was an only child, and um, you know had a child herself. She was part of the sandwich generation that nobody would come visit, nobody, and they didn't along the way.
Mhm.
Once she reached certain stages where they didn't know or want to or learn how. And I think emotionally they just can't handle it. But we need to learn this. We need to learn that we can meet them where they are, right? And they can be um, in 1940, and you can be there with them, and or you can talk about something. You don't get to say, remember when we went on that trip with the church, if they don't remember that. You don't get to see that. No, but they can bring up something that they know from before. And so yeah, it's really a problem because it is lonely for the loved ones. Absolutely.
I'm wondering, we all seem to be of the same mind insofar as what else do we need to know so we can, ourselves be better caregivers, but also educating people who we know and who we work with. And I'm wondering if the conversation project, it's been a while since I've gone through it, um, would be helpful. I mean, is that something maybe I'm making this up, Nadine, that, we talk about, with our hospice, volunteer coordinator as far as can we have some training? Can we have awareness and a handout so that the family, again, who is feeling isolated, at least has I don't know, a sheet to be able to give, to say to different friends if they see them at the grocery store or the, church or school or whatever, and say, she would love to see you. And, I know you're busy, but if you're having any like, I don't want, I don't know what to expect. Here, let me give you this, or I'll send it to you in an email, whatever, so that, we're spreading the word, if you will, for people like me who need to know more and want to know more.
Mhm. Yeah. And there's a lot of resources out there to learn. And people are busy, right? And
Mhm.
unless it's affecting them, and it's like this with a lot of things, right? I don't know a lot about cystic fibrosis, for example.
Mhm.
I don't have anyone
Mhm.
in my family who has that disease. I don't have it myself. I'm sure I could learn about it. Um, when we know someone who is a caregiver for someone living with dementia, I think that what we can all do is sort of spread the awareness about how we can help that care partner, that the circle of care and the individual, because people don't know what to do. So,
Mm.
and they don't know how to handle it themselves. And it's okay to ask for what we need. And if a caregiver wants to and can ask for help from their community, but wouldn't it be nice if the community offered the help instead?
Mm.
Similar to how we talk about grief, that when someone dies,
Mm.
tell me what you need. Well, they don't know what they need, right? Or they don't want to
Right.
ask. So what are some ways that we can, as a community or as a friend or another family member, do to help take off? Like um, Margot said, she asks her son, I need a break. Um, so
Mm.
just that's in a perfect world. That's my goal. Is one of my goals is to help spread that awareness that we need to help each other in many many ways, right? In our society, in our culture. But when it comes to dementia, people need support, and we need to step up to the plate with that and learn.
So I think you've been, telling us, but I'm going to ask you. First of all, I could talk with you for hours, and we need to wrap up.
A lot to talk about.
um, so, what's the one thing that you would want, listeners to the podcast to remember from this conversation? I know that's hard to do one.
um, can I do like one B and one C?
Yeah.
I think changing the narrative around the stigma and the conversation, ask questions, and if it's someone in your family, you do your best to bring it up. That's why I brought up the conversation project, because it gives you real tools of how to bring it up with like a parent or a friend or a spouse. So let's talk about this more, I think would be. And then 1B would be kidding.
Oh, yeah, that's great. So, I am going to thank you for sharing your expertise and your time with us today. And for everyone that's listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, the resources Lori mentioned today, I'm going to put them in the show notes. And you can find Lori at www.compassionatecrossings with an S doula.com. That's Compassionate Crossings doula. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
And so until next time, navigate your transitions with grace.
Yeah. Thanks for
Take
coming.
care. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.